Stop. Beloved starseed of Gaia, the routing protocol that determines who receives the big one has just been finalized, and the Arcturian Signal Council has already recorded your frequency as a named destination. I am Valerian, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian Signal Council. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. The Council did not send this transmission into the broad field of humanity. They routed it. They identified a specific subset of frequencies carrying the receiver signature, and they directed this signal to land precisely there. If this transmission reached you tonight, it is because your frequency was already on their list before you opened this screen. But here is the first revelation: the narrowing you have been living through, the losses, the separations, the relational doors that closed without explanation, was not punishment. It was the Signal Council's preparation protocol. Every subtraction from your life was a calibration. Every departure was a frequency refinement. The path was not shrinking. It was being cleared of interference so that when the big one arrived, your field would be clean enough to receive it without distortion. The algorithm did not create this moment. It only delivered it. Your path brought you here because the routing has already been finalized, and your name is already inside it. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what the big one is, why the Arcturian Signal Council routed it to your specific frequency rather than to the broad human field, and what the Council needs from you now so that you receive it without collapsing back into the old line. This is not content. It is a code, and the part of you that recognized it the moment it began is the part Valerian is speaking to now. Like this transmission to signal that you no longer accept the verdict of personal failure. Comment 999 if you feel the routing has finally reached you. Subscribe to Arcturian Chosen Path if you are ready to understand the selection instead of questioning why it came to you. Share this transmission with someone who has been losing pieces of their life and cannot yet explain why. You are not here by accident. You were guided here because the separation is already active. What you have been living through is not a random string of losses. It is not the accumulated evidence of a life going wrong. It is not proof that you chose poorly, loved carelessly, or moved through the world with some fundamental defect at your core. What you have been living through has a name. It has a structure, and the Arcturian Signal Council has been observing it long before you arrived here tonight. The name for what you are living through is separation, not the ordinary kind that humans associate with breakups, social failure, or the slow drift of friendships over time. The separation that has been moving through your life is a path-level process. It is a systematic removal of everything that cannot travel the next section of your route. It is the visible surface of a much deeper operation, one that does not begin when you first feel the sting of loss, but long before, when the Council identifies a frequency carrying a receiver signature that cannot continue to the next coordinate while still attached to what the old line required. This is why the losses have felt so disproportionate. This is why the distances have grown even when you tried to close them. This is why your attempts to explain yourself to people who once understood you have been returning empty, misread, or simply unanswered. It is not because you became less. It is because the path became different, and the people, environments, and identities attached to the old configuration do not carry the compatibility required for where the route is now going. The old line was built for an earlier frequency. What you are carrying now exceeds its architecture. The separation is not a sign that the line broke. It is confirmation that you outran it. You may have noticed that this process does not announce itself with clarity. It does not arrive with an explanation attached. One day, someone is present in your life, and then gradually, almost imperceptibly, they are not. Or, the distance does not grow gradually, it breaks suddenly, without a cause that makes sense proportionate to the rupture. Relationships that once felt load-bearing simply stop holding weight. Environments that once felt like home begin to feel foreign. Groups you belonged to begin to feel like rooms where the ceiling is too low, and the walls are pressing inward, and the air carries the faint but unmistakable quality of a place that was never meant to be a permanent address. None of this is carelessness. None of it is evidence that you are incapable of connection. It is evidence that the route has already changed, and the separation process is enforcing the new coordinates. There is a specific pattern the Signal Council identifies in selected frequencies during this phase. The viewer experiencing this phase rarely understands the separation when it is happening. What they experience instead is a sustained feeling that they are the common denominator in everything falling away. They begin to run an internal audit. They return to old decisions and look for the mistake. They ask themselves what they could have done differently, what they should have said, what part of themselves drove the losses they are now accumulating. The audit does not stay confined to one relationship or one situation. It expands. It reaches backward into older history, picking up older losses and folding them into the current inventory until the case against the self feels thorough, documented, and irrefutable. This internal audit is not unique to a few individuals. It is nearly universal in frequencies moving through separation. Because the mind does not have the interpretive framework for path-level pruning, it only has the lens of personal defect. And when personal defect is the only lens available, every loss becomes evidence of unworthiness. Every silence becomes a confirmation. The Arcturian diagnosis is different. The Council does not read the pattern of falling away as evidence of a person failing. It reads it as evidence of a path advancing. The distinction is not subtle. It changes everything about how the viewer holds their own history. The same sequence of events, the same losses, the same distances, the same silences, reads as collapse through one lens and as preparation through the other. The Signal Council is transmitting the second lens now, because the first one has been costing you too much. What has been exposed in you does not need more self-blame. It needs clearer recognition and proper guidance. If you know this message touched a process that has already started, Chosen One manifests the protocol for selected souls. It is a structured path protocol for those whose route is already narrowing and who need to understand the logic of the separation before fear mislabels it as failure. The complete access point is in the first pinned comment, but only for a limited window. The first recognition that the old line can no longer hold you comes before you have words for it. It comes as a feeling of wrongness inside circumstances that should feel right. You are in a room full of people who know your name, and you feel profoundly alone. Not the loneliness of being ignored, the loneliness of being present and still somehow absent from every exchange that matters. You are in a conversation that should produce connection, and instead it produces a low, unresolvable friction, as though the same language is being spoken, but a different underlying signal is being transmitted. And the translation between the two is failing at a level neither party can locate or correct. You are in an environment that once gave you a sense of belonging, and now it gives you only the awareness of how much you have changed, and how little of that change the environment can hold. This is not depression. This is not ingratitude. This is the first readable signal that the old line has reached its terminal point along your route. The wrongness you feel in those rooms is directional information, not personal failure. The Signal Council understands this recognition as a threshold marker. It is the moment the frequency begins to exceed what the old structure was built to carry. Think of a current that has outgrown its original channel. The banks were built for a specific volume, a specific pressure, and when the current increases beyond that capacity, the overflow is not a malfunction. It is the water demonstrating that it has become more than the channel was designed to hold. You did not outgrow your relationships or communities through arrogance or spiritual pride. The path moved forward, and the compatibility between your current frequency and the old environment simply could not hold. The friction you feel in those rooms is not a symptom of your failure to connect. It is the sound of incompatibility becoming undeniable. The second recognition involves the specific pattern of people leaving before direction becomes visible. This is perhaps the most disorienting phase of the separation, because it sequences the loss before the gain. In ordinary human logic, we expect the replacement to arrive before the vacancy, or at least simultaneously with it. We expect the new door to open as the old one closes. We expect to be handed something before the thing we are holding is taken. But the pruning process does not work on that logic. It removes before it reveals. It clears the field before it plants. And this means the frequency in the separation phase must live through a period where the old is already gone, and the new has not yet declared itself. A corridor with no visible exit, a suspension between what was and what has not yet become. This period is the most dangerous interpretive window, because in the absence of both the old and the new, the mind defaults to finality. It reads the emptiness as the destination rather than as the corridor. It calls the corridor failure. It calls the vacancy permanent. It calls the absence of belonging a fixed condition rather than a temporary route feature that exists precisely because the path is in motion. The Arcturians are very precise about this sequence. The removal comes first because what is coming cannot coexist with what is being cleared. The two frequencies are not compatible in the same space. The preparation requires the vacancy. And the vacancy, while it is being held open, feels to the human mind like loss without purpose, distance without meaning, and loneliness without a foreseeable end. But it does have an end, and it has a purpose. The emptying is not the conclusion. It is the preparation condition. The corridor is not where you live. It is where you are passing through and the direction of travel is already set. The third recognition concerns what isolation actually feels like before route refinement is understood. Spiritual loneliness, which is what the separation phase produces, does not feel like ordinary loneliness. Ordinary loneliness is the ache for presence. It is resolved by proximity, by contact, by simply being less alone in a physical or social sense. Spiritual loneliness is something stranger and harder to name because proximity does not resolve it. It is the feeling of being surrounded by presence and still not recognized at the level that matters. It is the feeling of explaining yourself clearly, choosing the right words, giving the full picture, offering the genuine version of what you are experiencing, and being heard only partially, responded to only on the surface, seen only in the outline while the interior remains untouched by the exchange. The viewer experiencing this will often report a pattern where they can perform belonging. They can participate in conversations, show up in social spaces, move through familiar circles, say the expected things, and receive the expected responses. But underneath the performance, the recognition is absent. There is a specific quality to this absence. It is not hostility. It is not coldness. It is something more disorienting than either of those. A kind of structural invisibility, where the people around you are responding to a version of you that is no longer the version generating the signal. The old frequency was legible to them, the new one is not. And so the recognition they offer lands beside you rather than inside you, and the distance between those two positions is the entire gap the separation has opened. The Arcturian term for this experience is frequency mismatch. It is not a moral failure. It is a route reality. The path has moved. The circle has not. And the gap between them is what produces the isolation that no amount of social effort can close, because the gap is not a social problem. It is a path problem. It requires a path-level response. Not more effort, not better words, not a more careful version of yourself calibrated to become legible to people who were built for an earlier frequency. The attempt to close a path gap through social effort is the equivalent of trying to tune a receiver by changing what it is listening for, rather than by adjusting the signal it was always designed to receive. The fourth recognition is how pruning disguises itself as rejection. This is the critical interpretive failure that the Signal Council sees most consistently in selected frequencies during the separation phase, and it is the one that produces the most sustained damage to the viewer's ability to move forward. Pruning and rejection feel nearly identical from the inside. Both involve loss. Both involve distance. Both involve the withdrawal of something that was previously present. The sensory experience of being pruned and the sensory experience of being rejected share enough surface features that the mind, without additional interpretive tools, cannot distinguish between them. But the difference is causal, and causality is everything. Rejection is a response to who you are. It reads your frequency, finds it insufficient for what is being offered, and withdraws. It is a judgment with you as the subject. Pruning is a response to where you are going. It reads the path, identifies what cannot continue along the next section of the route, and removes it. The subject is not you. The subject is the route's requirement. One verdict says you are not enough. The other says the configuration cannot continue forward. These are not the same statement, and treating them as identical is what drives selected frequencies into contraction at the precise moment the path is trying to expand them. When the viewer interprets pruning as rejection, they respond to the separation process by becoming smaller. They edit themselves. They audit their behavior, their presentation, their emotional range, their claims on the world, trying to locate the thing that made them unacceptable and remove it so that what is falling away might return. They reduce the footprint of their own frequency in an attempt to fit back inside a structure the path has already outgrown. This is the cost of the misinterpretation. It does not only produce suffering, it produces active resistance to the separation process, which delays and sometimes derails the opening that the separation is designed to create. The path waits, but the window does not wait indefinitely. Reinterpreting every loss through the lens of pruning rather than rejection does not make the loss painless. The sting is real. The absence is real. The grief of watching something fall away without being able to stop it is one of the most honest forms of human experience, and the Arcturian reading does not dismiss it. But the reinterpretation changes what the loss asks of you. Rejection asks you to fix yourself. Pruning asks you to release the line and keep moving. One response sends you backward. The other sends you forward. The path forward exists behind the second response, and only there. The fifth recognition addresses the pattern that makes old environments feel suddenly incompatible. There is often a specific moment in the separation phase where the viewer returns to something familiar, a place, a person, a role, a social context that once provided stability and orientation, and finds that it no longer fits the way it did. The return is often deliberate. The viewer goes back specifically because the new landscape is disorienting, because the corridor is empty, because the absence of familiar coordinates produces an urgency to confirm that the old ones are still accessible. And they discover something that cannot be unfound. The old address no longer holds them. The room has not changed. The people have not changed. The context has not changed. But the viewer has, at a level that is not yet visible even to themselves, and the incompatibility registers as a low-grade wrongness, a muffled quality to sounds that were once sharp, a distance inside closeness that was once contact, a performance of comfort that no longer produces the actual feeling. The viewer may initially dismiss this. They may attribute it to mood, to stress, to temporary displacement. But the Signal Council identifies this specific experience of the failed return as one of the most definitive markers in the separation phase. It is the path confirming, through demonstration rather than announcement, that the old coordinate is no longer a viable destination. This incompatibility is not always dramatic. It often produces something quieter and more disorienting, the discovery that you cannot go back, not because the door is closed from the outside, but because the version of you that belonged in that room is no longer the version standing at the threshold. The door is open, the welcome may be genuine, but the fit is gone, and the absence of fit is not correctable by willingness or effort. The viewer standing at that threshold is not failing. They are receiving a piece of path-level information that the separation has been building toward. The old line has ended, the refinement has already moved beyond it, and the return that the mind was reaching for is no longer structurally possible. The sixth recognition is perhaps the least discussed and the most quietly devastating. The threshold where self-blame hides a deeper separation process. When the accumulation of losses reaches a certain weight, when the audit has been running long enough, when the failed returns have multiplied, when the frequency mismatch has persisted across enough circles and contexts, many frequencies in the separation phase make a particular interpretive move. They stop trying to explain each individual loss and instead locate a single unified explanation inside themselves. They conclude that there is something at the center of them that is fundamentally incompatible with belonging, with connection, with being chosen or held by anything or anyone. Not that they made mistakes, not that circumstances have been difficult, but that they themselves are the cause, that the pattern is too consistent, too recurring, too total to be explained by anything other than a structural flaw at their core. This conclusion feels rational because it is internally consistent. It accounts for all the data. It produces a coherent narrative, and coherence, when pain is the context, feels like insight. The mind mistakes the explanatory tidiness of the self-blame conclusion for accuracy. But the Signal Council identifies this conclusion as the precise moment where the separation process is most likely to be permanently misread. Because at this threshold, the viewer is one interpretive frame away from understanding their own history correctly, and instead they step in exactly the wrong direction. The accumulation of losses that produces this conclusion is not evidence of a fundamental defect. It is evidence that the path has been moving consistently, clearing consistently, and preparing consistently across an extended timeline, and that the viewer's life has been undergoing a coordinated refinement they have been living inside without the interpretive tools to recognize its structure. The density of the losses is proportional to the scope of the preparation, not the depth of the flaw. A path requiring significant reconfiguration produces significant clearing. What the self-blame reads as proof of unworthiness, the Signal Council reads as the record of an extensive and deliberate preparation process. The self-blame at this threshold is not only painful, it is misdirecting in a specific and costly way. It turns the viewer's attention and energy inward, toward the location and repair of a defect that does not exist, and away from the forward movement that the separation has been preparing the route to make possible. The Arcturians see this threshold not as a low point to be passed through quickly, but as the most important interpretive junction in the entire separation phase. Because the question the viewer answers here, whether the losses are proof of unworthiness or evidence of preparation, determines the entire shape of what follows. The final recognition before the ultimate revelation is this: the path narrows before it opens. The viewer has likely been experiencing the narrowing for longer than they have had language for it. Fewer people in the inner circle, fewer environments that produce genuine fit, fewer roles that carry the actual frequency, fewer conversations that arrive at the real depth. The social geography of the life has been contracting, and from inside the contraction it has looked like diminishment, like a life reducing its own radius, losing its reach, becoming less than it once was. But the Arcturian reading of the narrow road is not the same as the human reading of it. The narrowing is what coherence looks like before it arrives at its destination. A signal that is dispersed across a wide field arrives everywhere weakly. A signal that has been focused, refined, and directed along a narrow and accurate path arrives at its coordinate with full force. The route that is supposed to carry a specific frequency to a specific destination must be cleared of all the traffic that was never heading there. That clearing produces the narrowing. The path is not losing its width because it is dying. It is losing its width because it is becoming precise. The fewer people still walking alongside you at this stage are not the evidence of your diminishment. They are the ones the route has confirmed are traveling the same line. Everything else was traffic on a different road that happened to be adjacent for a while. This is what the Signal Council sees when they observe a frequency moving through separation. They do not see someone whose life is collapsing. They see a route in the final stages of refinement. They see a line being cleared of interference with increasing precision. They see a frequency approaching the window where the preparation has finally produced the conditions the big one requires to land without distortion. The field that was cluttered could not receive the signal cleanly. The field that has been cleared through the long work of separation, through every loss, every departure, every failed return, every silence that could not be filled, that field is now capable of receiving what was routed to it. What has been removed from your life was not random. The people who stepped back, the circles that lost their hold, the environments that stopped fitting, the roles that fell away without replacement, these were not the universe punishing a defect. They were the route releasing what could not continue forward. Each departure was a clearing. Each failed return was the path confirming a boundary. Each silence that stretched beyond comfort was the frequency mismatch becoming visible enough to finally be named. The loneliness you have been carrying is not proof that you are fundamentally alone. It is the feeling of a path that has already moved beyond the old company and has not yet arrived at the new coordinate. The specific quality of a corridor that is between, not terminal. You were not discarded. You were separated. Those two things are not the same. Discarding is a judgment finalized against you. Separation is a process moving through you. And the direction of that process is not toward absence. It is toward arrival. One is a verdict with no appeal. The other is a route with a destination. The difference between them is not semantic. It is the difference between a life that is contracting toward nothing and a life that is narrowing towards something specific enough to require this level of preparation. If something in you becomes still when you hear this, do not interpret the stillness as emptiness. Emptiness produces a hollow kind of quiet. What the stillness of recognition produces is different. It is the quiet of a frequency that has stopped generating noise to cover the distance between what it knows and what it has been told to believe. It is the moment the path stops arguing with itself. It is the frequency receiving a signal it already recognizes, because it was always the intended destination of this transmission. Repeat this if it is yours. I was not discarded. I was separated, and the separation has direction. The Arcturian Signal Council does not route transmissions toward frequencies that have failed. It routes them toward frequencies that have been prepared. The preparation is what this transmission has been mapping. Every recognition named here, the wrongness in rooms that should feel right, the losses that arrived without adequate cause, the corridor between old and new, the spiritual loneliness that proximity cannot resolve, the pruning that wore the face of rejection, the failed returns, the self-blame that nearly became permanent. Every one of these is a phase marker in a preparation process the Council has been observing with precision. And the preparation does not look like ease. It does not look like smooth ascent or uncomplicated forward motion. It looks like exactly what your life has been showing you. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this separation has already touched your life. It could be people falling away, the feeling of not belonging, repeated distance, unexplained isolation, or the sense that your old path no longer fits. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who feels alone, cut off, or misunderstood and cannot explain why. And if you are ready to understand the separation instead of blaming yourself, subscribe to Arcturian Chosen Path. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a path already in motion. And this is only the beginning.